Hello, Stonewater family, and welcome to another podcast where we continue our conversation around man camp. My name is Woody Hagar. I'm one of the pastors up here at Stonewater, and today I've got one of my very good friends, Trent Bellew.
Hey, you say my name right.
Yeah, well, ever since you told me it's about the bear,
Right.
Bellew the bear, I've kind of remembered it.
That's the easiest way to remember.
So you and I go back a very long time, and I know that some of your story has to do with man camp. So
Yes.
the conversations we've had before, I've been asking guys, hey, tell us about your man camp experience. I want to do a little bit of this differently. I want to tell your story. And I know that man camp had a role to play
Right.
in what's going on. So before that, I just want to have folks get to know you a little bit. So
Okay.
what do you do? How long you been at Stonewater?
Oh, wow. So let's see. My wife and I, we've been at Stonewater now going on, let's see, probably 10 years now, close to 10 years. Because we moved here just after my oldest daughter was born. She's 10 now, so almost 10 years now. It's funny. We moved from Plano down here to Granbury because my in-laws live here. My mom lives here. And, my wife's brothers and sisters all live here. So it was pretty easy because she was going to school full time. I was traveling for work incessantly back then. And so with her having a newborn, then it was easier for her to just be surrounded by family and have people take care of her and stuff like that. So,
But you serve up here at Stonewater, right?
yeah. So Sunday mornings, most of the time you're going to see me usually around Kidsmen somewhere. So nowadays I actually serve on the CRG team, so the critical response group. And so I'm usually roaming the halls, but most of the time, probably the last year or so, has been right around Kidsmen is where I spend most of my time. So I do the CRG stuff, but then I help Kidsmen out by talking to dads as they're going and drop their kids off, because most of us tend to be anonymous when we're dropping kids off. They're like, hey, moms, how's it going? Dads are like, who are you? And so I happen to have a fairly decent memory when it comes to faces and names, so it's pretty easy for me to walk up and say hi to dads I've seen like 5-6 weeks in a row, ask them what their name is, give them a big whole hug if they want one, because that's me. And
You do give very, very big hugs.
So, but that's what I do right now. It's not the same job I've had over the years, but it's what I've been doing for probably the last year or so.
So I want to back up and kind of give some context to your story. So 10 years ago, I remember when
I'm almost afraid to know what you remember about 10 years ago.
Yeah, so let's just, this is your story to tell, not mine. But yeah, let's back up 10 years ago. How did you get involved with Stonewater? What was it like?
So Stonewater actually wasn't our first choice. We came to Stonewater, and I think they had a guest pastor on stage at that time, and it was not good. But at the same time, we were also, like, I had been removed from church mentally, I'd been removed from church for decades. Physically, we had been going to a church in Plano for a couple of years, but it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything. It was just so I could make my wife feel good. But so we moved down here, and we're like, okay, so we got to find a new church home to go to. So we come to Stonewater. I'm pretty sure it was a guest pastor, but it didn't, like, there were just little things, semantics really, that caused my wife to have some problems when we first came in. And then there were just stupid things in my own head that kept me from wanting to like this place. And so made a few trips to some other churches, came back to Stonewater because something kept telling us that maybe we should just give this place another try. Like that was just a one-off thing. That wasn't like permanently how Stonewater was going to be. And so we come in, and it's Chris Williams is the pastor teaching that day. And which means he fits right in with the ADD and the self-deprecating humor. Like my brain is just like, yes, like that's the perfect kind of pastor to me. But he's on stage, we get done, and it just feels like home. We didn't have unfortunately, many people say hi to us or anything like that, but it still felt like it felt better that time. Like we really felt like, it was, it could turn something long term if we really wanted it to.
So how'd you guys get involved after that first Sunday?
So then so Audrey was still full-time at school. And so we were just trying to get her degree wrapped up, possibly get her recruited off to whatever job she was going to do. And then, but I was traveling so much that it was really hard to dedicate any kind of real time to anything. So it took us a little while before we could say, okay, we really need to prioritize getting into the church far more than just being here on a Sunday and watching whomever's going to teach that week and saying hi to the 6 people that sit around us, be like, all right, so that's our family, that's not the way it works.
Much like a community. So real quick though, you said you travel for work. Like, so what does the work situation for you look like?
Well, today it's very different than what it was back then. But
back then what was it like?
So I'm a technical instructor. I take really difficult concepts and I make them super, super simple for people to understand when it comes to a lot of different forms of technology, mostly centered around, networks and things like that. So I talk all the time.
So you're a smart guy that trains other people.
I don't know. I would say that I'm smart. I just happen to have, God made me able to talk to people. That's the main thing.
I like that definition. All right.
So back then I was traveling all the time. So I would travel. So see, this would be 2012 going into 2013. And so we're looking at probably 40 to 50 weeks out of the year, except for my vacation. I'd be on the road Monday to Friday, if not Monday to Saturday or Sunday to Friday. Wow. If I was going out of country, it could be multiple weeks, sometimes months at a time.
Okay. So that you travel a lot you were traveling a lot for your job at the time.
Right.
So you didn't want to just come in on a Sunday morning and say hi to the few people that you knew or that you sat around at church. How did you guys get plugged in?
So it was one of the weeks they were making a big play for something back then they called journey groups.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And, but journey groups back then were like, way different than the way we do things now, but these things were huge, right? So, like the first journey group we tried to go to was something like 50 people. And you're just like, how am I going to get to know anybody here? You barely have enough time to go around the room to introduce and say your first name, much less actually talk about anything. And so that was kind of crazy. And then we found one. It was so we go back, and I forget who was running journey groups or overseeing it at the time, but actually I think it was Crystal. Anyway, so he pointed us to Foundations Group. And I was like, so what are we expecting to get in a Foundations Group? And he's like, well, it's run by Woody Hagar. And I was like the cartoon Hagar? And he was like, no, not Hagar the Horrible. And I was like, although you might think that at sometimes. But
this is all new jokes. I've never heard these before.
No, of course you haven't, right? And I was like, all right, so that's fine. We'll go pop in. We'll see what it's like. And I think it was Andre somebody emailed you and got the time and date and all that kind of stuff. And then showed up at this house. It was completely anonymous to us, right? Didn't know anybody that walking into the group or anything like that. But I will say that was great was that like within a few minutes of us being there, and then like our only daughter at the time, Kathleen, she's
little thing
2 running around this house like she owns it already. And but like you and Jamie did a really great job of like making us feel like a part of like a home church, not so much like a small group, but like an actual home church, which was crazy because neither one of us had grown up in a situation like that. Both of us came from entirely different church style backgrounds, most of which I ran from when I became a teenager. But yeah, we had not experienced something like that. So to have, you and I won't call the other families out by name, but all these other families that we would eventually get to know over time, that was entirely new to us. And honestly is part of probably one of the first steps that gets ultimately to this giant swing in my life.
Yeah. So I want to get to that because, because I know the story,
right?
Since that time, since 10 years ago, and you and I met during that journey group, We've remained friends. You know, we see each other at church. We hang out. We've gone to man camps
Through
together.
no fault of my own.
It's just the way the Lord works.
I
Man.
know.
So I'm aware of what was going on. But all right, tell us the other side of that, because during that 10 years and the last 10 years, I think it's while I was getting to know you, while you were going to Journey Group, while you guys were checking out Stonewater, tell me about the other side of your life.
Oh, wow. So 2012, 2013, this is where I'm at. How old am I at that point? I don't know. I'm probably 38, 39 at that point. And so just to give you an idea, so at the age of 38, I'm already carrying a 30-year addiction to porn, a 25-year addiction to alcohol, a 2-pack a day smoking habit since I was 18. So that's 20 plus years. A habitual liar in every aspect of my life. And the fact that I'm alone most of the time because I'm traveling for work, right? In all these different cities, countries, whatever it is. And sometimes you're allowed, it's, the travel was nice in that you get to go to cool places and sometimes you get to do some cool things. But at the same time, it also, as an alcoholic and, recreational drug user, be able to discover all kinds of things I'm not really supposed to be discovering. But at that point, it's, you're two different people is who I am at that point. I've lived so much of one of my lives that I'm trying to hide everything, that the people, you meeting me in this Journey Group, the person that you talk to on Sunday at Journey Group is not the same person I am 6 hours later on an airplane. And so it would, and I could turn it on and off as much as I wanted for weeks and months at a time. And
you did, right?
And did. And it was crazy, right? Because at the time I didn't feel any stress about it. Like I just had succumbed to it. I thought that was just going to be my life for the rest of my life, was that I was going to be these two different people, and had worked very diligently to set it up and maintain separation so that one wouldn't almost discover that the other exists, kind of thing.
So during this time, while you said you kind of do different people, I'd see Trent on a Sunday night, I think is when our Journey Groups were.
Yep.
And I'd meet a very different guy than the guy that was on the plane on Monday morning or Monday night.
Right.
So during that time, we're talking about man camp. Man camp is designed to get guys separated, unisolated, get them away from their life to be able to concentrate on, okay, what's going on in my life? What is God calling me to do? Did you go to man camp during this time where you were leading two different lives?
Oh, yes. So we went to, so you got me, I think it was later in 2012 was when the first one of the I think the first time I went, because it would be, so it was a bit of a process because it was actually between two different man camps. Well, two different interactions, I should say, at man camp that really kind of altered things. So the first one, you had told me that this was coming up, and you were kind of, because we were leading down the path where, that you were seeing things in me that I just did not see and did not care to know about, that kind of stuff. Speaking some wild, crazy truths in my life that I didn't really understand at the time. I know way better now, but at the time it was just like, you're a crazy person. I wasn't sure we were going to be friends.
Because you were living two different lives,
Exactly, yeah. Right? I wasn't sure how much longer we were going to be friends. But you get me to go to the first one. It's like in September or something like that in 2012. And we're out at Glen Lake in Glen Rose. So, we're only talking, man camp back then was only 50 to 60 people.
Yeah, it wasn't very big.
And we only had two cabins. It was the non-snoring cabin and the other non-snoring cabin.
Which both had snores in it, by the way.
I think that was the only time I've actually popped my own tent. So I happened to have a tent in my trunk and couldn't get past all the people snoring in the room. So I went behind one of the lodges and popped the tent up that was in the trunk of my car and slept there all night. But I was actually, so like, I didn't really know what to expect from that one. So what I got out of the first one was, it was just not what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be axe throwing and shooting guns and, learning how to skin a deer and all that kind of stuff. And it turned out to be none of those things. But it was off-putting is what it was.
What do you mean by off-putting?
So I've got these two lives set up, right? So I've got, Church Trent, the Monday through Friday, if I happen to be home that week, everybody knows, jolly, fat, happy, hugger, that's who I really am. And
I'm so glad.
I'm so glad that's who I maintained, right? That's the person that won. I'm glad. Thank you, God.
Just mostly the hugger part. But so you have the one side.
So I have the one side. So, I have these two different lives going on, and so I get to that first man camp, and and like I said, it's much smaller than what we see today, but it's still that same. It can be off-putting really badly when you're expecting one thing, and where you're expecting, because now I'm isolated, so I'm thinking, Trent number 2 is going to be the one that gets to come out. That's the, crazy stuff's going to happen. So I might as well be the crazy version of me, right? And so I get there, and guys are praying. This is like one of the first times I've met Casey, and that's a little off-putting at first, because he's, like you said, everything is so straightforward, and he's got such this logical mind about the way things are done and how things are done, and it's refreshing today, but man, was it off-putting back then. And then, of course, you're I didn't think you could change, but it was like you changed, because it was like you found your center, almost like you were able to talk to people and point them in the right direction and stuff like that. And then meeting Jeremy and Joey for the first time, 1-to-1. And then I think we even had like a guest speaker that came in like that Friday night or whatever. And like, I was just not prepared to see a bunch of men sing together and pray together, and like at least half of them willing to talk to each other, like more than like, hey dude, how you doing? What's your job? Let's make sure we're staying our little hula hoops. I only need to know enough ancillary information about you to decide if I want to invite you over next week for the Super Bowl, right? That kind of stuff. But it was just a.
What did you take away from it? Like going home from man camp that first time, knowing you had kind of two different lives. What shifted? Did anything shift?
It was the most off-putting thing about it was when I was, as I was driving home, it was the level of honesty between people, like having pastors, or even just general men of any kind, that would stand up and just lay out everything that was happening, right, to complete strangers. Like, I don't know who you are. You have no idea how much I'm going to judge you, because I'm constantly judging people back then. You have no idea. But they didn't even care, right? They were just like, this is me. This is how jacked up I am. I got to win, over here doing this or whatever it was. It was just, I needed to, and then like, fire pit time at the end, which, is altered greatly, but it's one of the cool things we get to do. Back then it was just fire pit time at the back, at the back end of the lodge. But, but it was just that moment where people would stand up and they would say, I've experienced this, I've done this, and like grown men weeping and crying like little kids, and
nobody made fun of them.
And nobody made fun of them, right? It was just these like other men that, like me, had been through some pretty massive junk, from death and drugs and jail and whatever, and just some of them finding freedom for the first time. And I didn't even know what that was like.
Yeah.
And, because I had been, like I said, with these multi-decade addictions and this duplicitous life at this point, like I'd been locked into that for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I think that was the part that it was like really scary to watch that happen, because I was like, is that supposed to be me?
Mm.
Like, just seeing other guys having gone through that, and you know, the stupid part of me is still like, well, your stuff is, you know, way easier to get over than my stuff, right? I mean,
That's everybody's. Yeah.
that's the, you know, the comparison has become the comparison. And, but it's just that moment, you know, all these guys just standing up telling their stories, and, you know, here's some of them small victories, some of them huge victories, but in God's eyes are all massive victories. Right. But I didn't know that at the time. It was just, I remember seeing you at the end of it and then walking back to my car going, I don't think I'm ever coming back to one of these things. That's a little bit too close to real to me.
Okay. So what happens next?
So we go, so that's 2012, 2013, we have the second man camp. And, it's that one that really starts kind of poking fingers into I'm two different people. So we're Glen Lake again. This is like right before we start transitioning to the other one because of all the people. Now we're at like 110 or something.
That was
like
a big
that.
deal back then. We were over 100 people.
Right. We're like, whoa, we needed 5 cabins. We might have to leave Glen Lake and go somewhere else. But we, how do I describe it? So there's at Glen Lake, to have this one where it's like a big lodge building, and it's got like this wraparound deck that goes on it. It's got all these fancy rocking chairs like you see in front of like Cracker Barrel or something like that. It's got like a boatload of those
right in front of the pool, right?
and I'm sitting there, and so we've had I can't remember who was that spoke that Friday night, but it was after that. And it was before we go the big, massive hike up the mountain.
Yeah, to the cross.
Right, to the cross that's on the mountain. And so we're sitting out there. We've got small groups and stuff like that. And, you know, and I meet a gentleman and who's like, I love him to this day. And I'm not going to call him out by name. I just know that we were talking in the small group about different things, and it was the first time I would publicly admit to anybody that I have a dual life, that I'm two different people.
So you admitted to this guy?
I admitted to this group.
Oh, okay.
And because I didn't know this guy yet, and we had so we're all sitting there, and I'm in my comfy rocking chair. I don't want to say a thing. I'm just listening to people's stories like I did the last man camp, and I'm just like, you know, constantly casting judgment against these people and what they're doing. And I'm like, your stuff's nothing like my stuff. And, you know, and it comes around the circle, and it finally gets to me, and I can't even control it. I just blurt it out. I'm like, I'm just two different people living life right now. I don't even know who's talking at this moment.
Wow.
And then I just started talking about, you know, decades of porn addiction and alcohol and cursing and smoking and lying and you name it, and it just all comes falling out like a waterfall. And I just stop and I look at everybody, and I'm just waiting for like all the rearing back to happen. Like, you're not the kind of person we want here. You know, I'm waiting for crosses to come out. Get out, devil, you know. And because I grew up Southern Baptist, that's what we would do to people. And so
you're not as perfect as everybody thinks you are.
Right. And so all of that stuff comes falling out, and I'm just like, and suddenly I'm just like, you know, putting my hand over it. What did I just done?
Yeah.
And so everybody just kind of looks at me, and then it's like, all right, so just next. You know, nobody says anything. Nobody does anything. There's next. So next to me is, you know, the gentleman, and he looks at me and he's like, because of you, I can admit that I do the exact same thing. And so, like, he doesn't say anything else because he's that, you know, I'm not going to talk until I really get to know you kind of person, but moves on, you know, finishes out the circle or whatever it is. And then so we break, and we're starting our way to the cross on the mountain. And he just kind of saddles up next to me and walks with me the entire way up the cross. And that's all we do is just bounce, talk through the woods, getting lost, finally make our way to the cross on the mountain. But it's just me and him the whole time, just talking about, you know, what it's like leading two different lives, and how much our wives know and don't know. And, you know, how did
that feel to talk with somebody at the same place you were? Because you hadn't, at that point, like, no one had ever
nobody knew, nobody had known. Like I had never met somebody that was like, I'd met people that were on that way, but like not nearly as divided and well kept and maintained and as long as I had done it. Right.
Hidden. Yeah.
I was like, I'm a pro at this. Not really. And, it was just weird. It was, is the only way I could really describe it at the time. Like now I could say it was refreshing because I was honest with somebody more so than myself for the first time in a really, really long time.
Decades.
Yeah. Because Andrea and I had already been married at this point, something like 15 years. Right. So, I mean, like I had carried that stuff into our marriage, already multiple decades by the time we got, in some cases, by the time we got married. We were already married like 15 years and it was still, and it was still ramping up. Like it still hadn't even gotten to its worst point yet. And so, but it was at the time, it just felt strange to have somebody else who was an almost mirror image.
Yeah, you're not alone in this.
Right.
I bet that felt strange.
And it was just because I could listen to Joey and Jeremy and Chris and, other people talk about, from their vantage point way up high as church going people for their entire life. They've known Jesus since the day they were born kind of thing. And, and I'm like, yeah, but you don't know. It's like down here in the trenches having to deal with this on a daily basis the way that I do.
That's the voice that was telling you.
Right. And so, just having that other person next to me that was now, was experiencing a very close, life the same way I was just strange.
So what happens next?
So man camp is over. And again, I run away because I'm just like,
it's weird.
Because
weird. Yeah.
It's gotten way too weird now. Right. It's like, there's another me there no, this is way too weird.
I'm never going back again.
Please, not ever again. And this one, I think this was the one you were like kicking and dragging me to.
Yeah.
Just because we were transitioning in journey group and a bunch of other things at the time. And you were just like, no, man, you need to step up and you need to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I know there's something going on and you need to handle it. It's like, all right.
And the best place to handle it is out in the open, man. Yeah.
Right. Out in the woods with a bunch of dudes.
Yep.
So, so that's at the end of 2013, rolling into 2014. February comes. I am in California, and I am, since that second man camp, I'm just going further down the drain. I was already, 10 pints a day, Guinness a day guy with, who knows how many bottles of scotch slapped on top of that, plus, everything else that I was doing. I get to February 2014, it's California, and my flight gets delayed. So I just sit in the bar and I just start drinking. And so at that point now I'm, 20 pints a day. I'm, even more scotch thrown on top of that, and everything else is going down even further. And so I just don't even try to hide it.
What do you mean?
I just drink whatever I feel like. Leave the airport multiple times to go have a cigarette. Texting my wife that, hey, I'm reading a book, or, I'm doing this or doing that, which none of it's remotely the truth. And eventually my flight takes off. We get back here to Texas, and I drive home. Probably shouldn't have driven home. But like my normal routine that I would go through thinking that I'm trying to hide everything. So like normally I would stop drinking, many hours before I would ever fly home, just so that all of that was gone by the time I got home.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a hint of the deception.
Right. The multiple washings of my hands and face and beard and everything to make sure that the smell of smoke wasn't on my face, even though it reeked through all my clothes. But that never occurred to me. So all that just went away. I just didn't even try to hide any of it. Just came home. It was like 2:00 in the morning that I finally got home. And my wife wakes up, and I know she knows because she's awesome, and wives know things about you that you never think they'd know, but they absolutely know. And so at this point, and I would learn later, my wife knew for at least a decade that all that stuff was going on. And, but I get home and, kiss my wife goodnight and crawl into bed, and I cannot go to sleep. And I am tossing and turning, and, I get up and I walk around the house, watch a little TV. I play a game on my phone. I can't go to sleep. I can't do anything to go to sleep. What I can do is listen to the constant voice in my head that's telling me today's the day.
Today's the day for what?
Today is the day that I'm going to have to tell my wife about everything. I don't want to do that. So I walk around the house. My daughter's a little over 2 years old, 3 years old. No, 2 years old at that point. And I'm walking into my office, kicking and screaming. I'm arguing with whatever this is. And I'm just like, there's no way I'm telling anybody what's going on. Like, nobody gets to know this stuff. I already let it out of the bag once at man camp. I'm not doing that again. And so it's like a good 4-hour fight of me and the Holy Spirit, really. I did not win. Let's just put it that way. I did not win. So sorry about that. So I walk into the room, and wake my wife up, kneel beside the bed, and I just tell her, I'm like, honey, I got something to tell you. You're not going to like it. And whatever the ramifications are, I will accept whatever it is that needs to be done.
So you tell her everything.
So I lay it all out. Every single one of those cards, one by one. And each card is its own 30-minute topic of conversation. And that's just to really understand what it means, much less actually trying to parse it through and how that leads to the other ones or how they're interconnected or whatever it is. I'm like, so, all right, so here's the alcohol one and here's the porn one. These are before I met you, by the way. And, here's the cursing one and here's the lying one and here's the smoking one, all of which were still before we met. And then, so I brought all this baggage that you didn't even know that I had. I brought all this baggage into the marriage. And then here's how they've all gotten worse. And here's how my job has enabled me to make it worse. Because it's kept me exactly the way Satan wants men to be. Completely isolated from the world. Isolated from my family. All alone. Foreign places. Talking to strangers.
No accountability.
Nobody knows, right? I mean, the company I was working for at the time didn't even bother to check receipts. So I could, all the stuff I was doing, I could have the company pay for. They wouldn't even care. And so, it was nuts is what it was. I was so far into this well, I'm not even sure I understood how to I didn't even know if there was a ladder that long to start climbing out of this thing. So, but through all that, that conversation is, and there's a lot of crying, weeping, some of the stuff my wife knew, some of the stuff she didn't know, some of the stuff she knew, but she didn't know how long, and all of it's painful. All of it's painful for her. It's painful for me. It's painful for me, both the stuff that I was doing to myself, but also the fact that I was doing this to other people. And I thought these were all victimless crimes, right? You don't see the ripple effects of some of these things until you stop doing them. And then you realize, oh, well, I don't do that anymore. which meant I don't do that anymore, which meant I don't do that anymore. And you're like, oh, hey, that was actually a lot more victims than I thought.
It always is.
And yeah, so that took a few hours to get through.
Okay, so you finally come clean, right?
Yep.
What happens different after that?
So, like the very next day I called you, told you about, what I was doing. And then, some point in time during that week or something like that, we met. And you gave me a couple of things to do. One of which was to remember all the damage that all those things did. So, it's like, that's one of those few times, like, you can look in righteous judgment and anger at what that is. That's where anger needs to be directed. That's not to where I'm going and the people I'm trying to go there with. It's meant to be looked at. Those are the things that caused me all my problems. Those are the things you can look angry at. And you had me write a letter.
Yeah.
Which I still have this day, or a variation of this day. And I even think you used in like one of your sermons years ago.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where I look back and it was just, and now that I was like clear-minded for once, like I actually, I wasn't perfect by any stretch of imagination, but I didn't have alcohol on board. I didn't have porn on the brain. I didn't have lying. I didn't have any of those things jading the view or the lens that I was looking through at life. I didn't have any of that. And it was weird.
Just looking at your life clearly.
Right. I was just like, my life is in shambles. Like it had jaded me so much, and I had separated both those lives that I didn't realize what each one looked like in comparison to the other. Right. It was like I was separating them so much that they were basically joining back up together, and I didn't even know it, kind of thing. Because my lenses were completely separate, but everybody else's were coming together in a clear vision that I was a complete wreck. And so I do that, but then I've got to turn around and go back on the road again. And I've got to go teach a class.
Right back into the fire.
Right back into the fire, alone. This time in another country. Of all places, I end up having to go to the Bahamas to teach a class.
That sounds terrible, Trent.
It was. I ended up in Nassau, and and my hotel is right outside where all the alcohol places are, because it's where all the cruise ships come in.
Tough day, huh?
It sucked. Everywhere I went, everybody's drinking but me. Because now's when I give up, now I have to be truthful about what I'm doing. I have to admit that I have a problem with alcohol, right? Whether you want to classify it as being a drunk or an alcoholic, it doesn't matter. I have a bad relationship with alcohol for a very long time.
So how did you do it?
I angrily ate hamburgers at a bar, staring at bottles of scotch, cursing every one of them with every bite. I think I even called you to tell you that one day.
Yeah, well, I think that was part of the journey. Is like we had a bunch of guys that were all we came around you and said, all right, Trent's got to go back on the road.
Right.
He's trying to get clean. He's got this ahead of him. He's got to do this alone. We need to get around him. Right.
Because it was like you and Rob and
yeah,
I can't even remember who else at the time. But
we had a small Bible study, I think, and it was all those guys that were leaning in, and we all said, all right, here's our numbers.
Right? Iron Man. That's right.
Yeah. Here's our numbers. Trent, if you get in a spot, you call us.
Right.
Right. And we'll talk you off the ledge.
Yep.
And I got one of those phone calls.
Yeah. It was the angry hamburger.
I remember this. This is like, so what are you doing? I'm looking at bottles of scotch, and I think you used the word, I'm F you in every single one of them.
That's exactly right. I was like, it was F you every bite.
Yeah.
Because it was all my favorites were staring at me right there on that shelf. And I was just like, oh my, with, the Guinness tap sitting right next to me as well. I was just like every single bite and just staring intently at every one of them. F you.
Directing your anger where it should go.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was all because of that topic that we had, writing that letter. And I was just like, man, Some genius words back then, let me tell you.
Oh, hey, you don't know that, but so to the full thing, like you give me a call and you say, hey, I really need to talk.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I know something's going on. I don't know what it is. And we sit down and say, okay, let's sit down. And you tell me, hey, this is my life. You know, I'm an alcoholic. I'm drinking. I'm smoking. I'm looking at porn. My wife, I had to tell her last night, and I don't know what to do. And literally, like and this is most pastors, right? They don't know what to do.
Right.
In that moment, I'm sitting at Starbucks looking at you, just broken, and I'm like, Lord, you need to put something in my head in the next 30 seconds.
Right.
Because I'm like, he's expecting me to know what to do, and I have no clue. And I'm like, Lord, what do I tell him? And it was just like, okay, just really being quiet, listening to the Holy Spirit saying, okay, he needs to know who he is.
Right.
Right. And he needs to know who his enemy is.
Right.
And I thought, hey, and words have power, right?
Yep.
Which is the letter was like, you need to, this idea of, hey, write it out. Write out who you are and who you are not.
Right.
Right. And direct that. And it was also about emotion, right?
Right.
Emotion is supposed to fuel us. It's
Right.
supposed to give us focus. It's actually supposed to do many things, but it can do that. This is why men get motivational speeches before they go off to war, right?
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
to ignite the initiative. And
Well,
I was simply trying to do that.
And it was easy because I had years that I have no memory of, whole periods of time in my life that I have no memory of because of how much alcohol I was consuming at the time. And it was just like, one of the things that my wife and I have been able to do together that very well over the 24 years that we've been married now, that is like, she's good at remembering certain aspects of our lives and I'm good at remembering the other aspects. Right. So I have to trust her with conversations and things like that because it was just not something that had nothing to do with alcohol. I was just not really good at that. But experiences and things like that, like I could tell my wife every single thing we did on our first date, from what she was wearing to the car we drove to the route we took to get to the theater, the fact that what movie we saw in the theater, where we ate breakfast, what she had for breakfast, what I had for breakfast. Like I can remember all those things. I can't remember a single thing what we talked about, but I can remember everything wrapped up in that experience. Mm-hmm. And that was really starting to become a problem because I wasn't remembering those anymore. We were having experiences and I've got whole years that are just gone. And it wasn't helped by the fact that I had a stroke later on in my life, but it was just one of those things that was like, I was already having those problems. And so turning off those spigots and getting rid of that stuff, I can't get those years back as a memory goes. And you might have to edit this part because it's the only way my brain is telling me to do it right now. But I can sure as hell be pissed off at what it was that stole it from me.
Yeah. That's a righteous anger, right? Yeah. We should be angry at the one that kills, steals, and destroys, right? You have evidence of that. So I want to bring it back around because I know that there's more stories. So what begins to happen in your life now that you're trying and you've got accountability, you came clean, you're living an open and honest life, and I'm interested to like, hey, how did God start to use that? Like I know that you went to other man camps and you had impacts there. So
I think I've only missed one since then.
All right, so tell me how this is impacted. Like that was what, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when all that went down.
So that'd be 2014.
Okay,
because it's been
how many days?
I have to pull up my app because that's one of the things about memory loss is I don't really keep track of days. So I have an app that tracks the number of days. It has been 7 years, 7 months, and 18 days since my last drink. Which is 2,790 days.
Yeah, praise God.
And as long as that number continues to go higher, then that means my life is just getting better and better.
Yeah. Amen.
When that day has to go back to 0, that's going to be a problem. Making sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. All right. So what I want to know is the man camp before that, you found out that you weren't alone in your struggle. You got to share some of that. You got to feel what it was like to be honest.
Right.
Right. Now you're on the other side of that honesty. You're actually walking in it. You go back to man camp, and what do you find?
I find a drunk guy at man camp.
Oh, wait. Back up and tell me that again.
I said I found another drunk guy at man camp.
What happened? Yeah.
We were, I think this is one of the first ones we do when we're moving over to Riverbend.
Yep.
And so we've got, the giant auditorium or gymnasium or whatever that is that we meet in now. And now we take up the whole thing, right? But back then we actually had it like split up between like us and like teenagers or something like that because we couldn't rent the whole thing. Yeah, it was actually a kid of somebody that I knew, and he had just moved to Texas, and he was really struggling, and so his dad had convinced him to come to man camp, and it was we're standing outside, and I was 6 or 7 months removed from, quitting everything and still trying to figure out what do I really look like and act like, right? I'm still trying to figure out this whole living an open life in front of everybody, and, that there's not two versions of Trent hanging out there in the world. There's really, the version of Trent you see today is the version of Trent that I am on the road. And like, that's always the
life
same.
And integrity. Yeah.
Right. And so I'm still trying to figure that out. Still struggling with like the smoking thing every once in a while, and the lying part, and trying to make sure that like I'm trying to actively remember, like, because I could lie about anything prior to that, like, hey, what are you drinking? A coffee? Not really. It's a giant Coke bottle in your hand, but I can tell you that I'm drinking coffee, and I can make you believe it eventually.
It's a little lies.
It's just little lies like that, right? And so. We had gotten done playing like one of those games in the gym or whatever it was, and we were staying up until ungodly times in the morning playing games, which actually turned out to be a really good thing because I come walking out because I'm going to go hide the fact that I'm about to have a cigarette by walking around the side of the building, and standing there is this young man and literally has a bottle of Jack in his hand, and he's drinking right there at man camp. And so, as a time tunnel, I have no idea how long we're up. I just remember that it's time for breakfast. The entire time, I basically stood there with him as he drank his bottle and talked to him about what's going on in his life and his move to Texas from California, what his life with his dad is like, what his life with his girlfriend is like, and eventually walk him, he finishes his bottle. We walk through sobering up, and then he spends the rest of the day Saturday basically attached at my hip, going to all the different classes and just talking to him all day long. And I'm like, you're not getting out of my sight. I was like, I know you got more stashed in the car because that's what we do. I know there's more pent up in there because that's what we do. And I'm going to let you know that you're not alone. You're not the only one that's got to deal with this ever again.
That seems perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
In hindsight being 2020, you're just like, dude, that was awesome. Right? At the time, I was like, I'm completely lost. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's why it felt like a time tunnel.
Yeah.
Right? That like this weird 4 to 5 hour window from the time I meet him until it's time to walk back across the street to go to breakfast. It was just one of those things that I was just like, it was obviously not me. It was obviously God and the Holy Spirit working in that moment. But like, oddly enough, I still don't feel it. Like I still see that young man every once in a while, and I know that it hasn't stuck with him, and I know that he's still experiencing problems. But I still talk to him. I still hug him. I still, try to let him know that the door is always still open to come back. We could start all over again, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Right. We can reset that counter back to zero, and we can move forward. And it's not just with me. That's with the church. That's with the family. That's with God. That's with everything. Right. So that was kind of weird.
You keep saying it's weird, but I think other people have things like providence or, the work of the kingdom. I mean, you say it's weird, but at the same time, like that's the life of a believer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, Casey was in here the other day and he said, as pastors, they get to see the Holy Spirit work over and over and over and over again. Like they get to see it.
Right.
And so they've got 10 times more hope than the rest of us because we don't experience that kind of saturation of things that really change it.
Right.
But it's interesting when you begin to lean into the work of the kingdom that you begin to see, wow, he really is at work.
Yep. And
the most amazing thing is he begins to work through you, right? As incomplete and as broken as we are.
Right.
He's like, okay, here's who I am and all of my baggage. He's like, I could use that.
Right.
Yeah. Welcome to the kingdom. I'm going to use you.
Well, it wouldn't be until years later that I even thought about the concept of like, when Jesus is picking his 12 disciples, it's like, right. So I picked a murderer, picked a cheater, picked a liar, picked a killer.
Oh, very.
All these different things. I'm like, they did way worse things than I did.
Yeah.
Wait, not really, but it's just like, man, if he can use those people, imagine what he can do to, with other skill sets and people and problems that are out there, right? Yeah. I mean, if he can use the worst of the worst to do some awesome things, imagine what he can do with you.
Yeah. So, hey, I know we there's probably more stories about Man Camp that I would love to hear from you, but I gotta wrap this up because we could keep on talking. So I wanna reset this and I want to say, all right, Trent, if you have an opportunity to speak to other men that may be in a very similar position that you were back in that day. I know that there's more men out there that live a dual life, right? There's the life they have on Sunday morning in front of their family, and then there's that private life that they keep hidden, and they try their best to be deceptive and to hide it. And those guys are listening right now. What would you say to them? Because there's that voice in their mind that says, hey, don't go to Man Camp. It's going to break it all apart. Once people find out, and this Man Camp is going to do it, but once people find out, man, it's never going to be the same. What would you say to those men that have that life like you did about going to Man Camp?
Dude, that's a good question. That's hard.
No, just speak to the Trent that
I know.
Yeah.
It's if I knew what life was going to be like on the other side of this, I would have made that jump a longer time ago. I didn't know what I was getting into when I went to Man Camp. I didn't know that this was the path that, God and the Holy Spirit were going to lead me down to do what I do today, right? And being able to serve in the church in a lot of different ways,
Yeah, you went to seminary, right?
So, yeah, quick story about that. So, like, there were a lot of like ministries and things that I couldn't get involved with because of the time commitment, because of all this traveling that I was doing for work, right? So, they had done, Joey had run like a seminary type thing that I know that you and some other folks had gone through. And I was like, man, that would be really, as it was, making that turn and realizing that, God was putting a ministry in my head about how to reach other men that were in that same kind of setup and lifestyle and how to get through some of that. And and I'm starting to play around with that concept. It's that, okay, so what do I need to do to give that more credibility, right? And because my industry is so heavily prevalent and deals with certifications for everything to be able to talk about anything, all right, so what am I going to do to give that some credibility, because my life's not that cool. So, right. It's not that good enough. So Joey was talking about rerunning this seminary program again. And this is like this is like 5 months before COVID happens. Right. So it's like, all right, well, if, and he talks about what days of the week it's going to be on. I'm like, well, I can't do that. Right. Cause I travel for work. There's no way to do it. So one Sunday, he talks about the fact that, and they figured out how they're going to do this on Facebook. So you don't even have to be here anymore. You can actually just watch it later in the week, as long as you fulfill all the requirements. And I look at my wife, she's already got her phone out. She's already signing us both up, right? Cause she had just gotten on staff. So she was like, all right, I got a direct line to Joey. Boom, we're in. And I was like, this is great. Right. And then COVID happened. So now I got nothing but time because I can't travel anywhere. Right. I teach all my classes online, which is great. But, now I got all kinds of time. So, I go through the seminary stuff and become a licensed pastor. And
they ordained you, right?
Yeah. So we had like the big, huge graduation in the tent. And you're going to be the first one to hear this. We had lost my father-in-law last year.
Yeah.
And that graduation, one of the things that we were supposed to do was to give communion to all of our friends and family that we'd invited.
Yeah, that's first act. Yeah.
And I stressed hard about what to say, what to do. It was crazy. And my wife is awesome because she was just like, it's not about you, and it's really not about what's happening. It's just about just going through the process, right? It's like, is what we do as a church, it's what we do as a family. Why wouldn't we do that here?
Right.
Leave it to you to be the voice of reason in my head.
That's what our wife should be. Yes.
So we get there, and I wouldn't think about it until months after my father-in-law passed away, but like that was his last communion.
Yeah.
Was the one that I gave him. It was also my sister-in-law's first communion, because she had been told from a very young age at different churches that unless she was this or this or this or had done these or gone through these classes or whatever it was, that she just wasn't allowed to take communion. And I'm in complete shock when this is happening at graduation. I'm just like, I just give her a hug. I'm like, I'm sorry for all that, because that's not even remotely what this is about.
Yeah.
So, if you'd have told me 9 years ago when we met,
yeah,
right, like this is where we would be today, and what I'm doing, and what my life looks like, and it's still by no means perfect, and there are definitely days where it's a fight from the moment I wake up to the moment that I go to sleep, and but it's all worth it. Everything in my life is better in some form or fashion. The ability to talk to other men and watch them grow, or watch them desire to fix their families or desire to fix themselves. Being able to actually teach at a man camp once.
Yeah.
Right? That was crazy. You're still my favorite class, though.
Yeah.
It was your class about your
Mike Williams said something about that. It was my first one, and I was like, I'd never taught anything before. Yeah,
that was the perfect class. I'm never going to forget walking into the nursing home and just passing out sunshine everywhere I went.
Yeah, that's the only way I could phrase it.
I heard that the first time you'd ever told me that, and I was so thankful that you had shared that story at one of the man camp things. But the first time I'd ever heard you tell me that story, I was like, that's what I want to be. I want to be that guy that when you see me, I want you to know that you're loved. That that you are appreciated. I want to smile. I want to give you a hug. I don't want to wipe away tears. Right? That's what I want. I want more men to live like that.
Yeah.
Instead of the way that the world tells us that we should be. It's okay to be real. It's okay to love people. And it's okay to be loved. Because that's,
when you're living a broken life, it's hard to believe that.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that, are you going to love that broken life too? Are you going to
Right.
believe those lies? Or are you going to love me for who I really am and not who I am when
Right.
I got it all together? And the truth is, I think that when you're around, I think other men, or just when you're around people that love like Jesus do, they can look past the brokenness and they can see what's there, right?
Right.
And I think that it's something you experience right now, but something I knew from the first time you walked in the Journey group all those years ago. It's like, man, I don't know what all he's got, but I can tell he loves people, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I saw. I was like, hey, God can use that, right?
Which I didn't really know back then. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know that I loved people because I certainly didn't love myself. That's for sure.
But that was it. It's like I looked at you going, hey, Lord, you can use him. Look how he loves people,
Right.
right? It was just natural in your way. So some of it is believing what other people have to say and see. And say, maybe I'm not all as broken as I thought I am. And God really loves broken people.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, he does a lot of great things with people who don't have it all together.
Right.
And in fact, it's an irony, and this is reading through Matthew in our church right now. What he doesn't have a lot of time for are the people who pretend to have it all together.
What was it? Even Craig Rochelle's got something about that, like what do they call it? The like the fake Christians, but he's got some like crazy name for it.
Yeah, there's a book he wrote called The Christian Atheist.
Yeah, something like it's in that where he actually talks about it, where it's you look the part, see the part, but you just can't deep inside you actually have none of that.
Yeah.
And that's it. I think at this point that's probably what I'm most fearful of, is that moment when Jesus is telling them, all these people will come to heaven. We prophesied in your name. We healed in your name. We did all these things in your name. And Jesus is like, I have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So, hey, let's summarize. If there's a guy right now, listen, who you were in that rocking chair at your first man camp, what would you tell him to get him to show up, to give this a chance?
You will never find a better place to tell the world who you really are.
All right. Trent, thank you for your time, man. Thanks for your story. Thanks for your vulnerability here. I know this isn't easy, but I think the Lord will use it.
Well, it's one of those things that, like I told you earlier, that when the church came out with the family values,
yeah, 7
stuff,
family values, Stonewater. Yep.
when it was the leading an open and honest life, it's like, all right, so I'm just going to have to wear my heart on my sleeve and let everybody read the book that is my life whenever they decide to turn a page. So
I got it. Trent, thanks for your time, man. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
I appreciate it.
Yep.